Good day. On behalf of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Government of the Philippines, my name is Daphne Osenia Paez. In this conversation, we are joined by Mr. Ibrahima Cheikh Diong, the Executive Director of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. Good day, Mr. Diong. Nice to see you again.
It is so great to see you again, Daphne, after 1 year.
Yes, I was just going to say, our last conversation was barely a year ago when you were just newly elected and chosen as the Executive Director. How has your year been?
Indeed, it's been a year, and it was a great conversation a year ago. I was quite excited about being new on the job. And you recall then, I talked about our ambition and aspiration, given what we are today. I'm extremely pleased that we made so much progress since last time you and I met, and it happened here in Philippines, not in any other countries. I couldn't think of a better place to come back with some great news.
Of course, this is the home of the fund.
Indeed.
The Philippines. So you've just completed the 7th board meeting. I know you have some very good announcements in a little while, but let's just go back to, you had the board meeting, but unfortunately, it happened just after the Philippines was battered by 2 typhoons and a devastating earthquake in Cebu. Did this somehow frame the mood of the 7th board meeting?
Well, definitely. Let me first of all express our compassion and solidarity to the government of the Philippines, to the people of the Philippines, for the devastation that came after the earthquake and the typhoons. These are moments that remind us, unfortunately, the importance of dealing with extreme weather conditions, and our compassion and our support goes to the government and the people of the Philippines. I think it's also a reminder about why the fund actually exists in the first place. And that is, when extreme weather conditions actually arrive, it is extremely important that we respond rapidly in making sure we actually protect the most vulnerable people, but also the infrastructure. Maybe to a certain degree, in our board meeting, where decision needed to be made, it could have inspired the board members to realize the sense of urgency, the sense of action. I think to a certain degree, people felt like we cannot leave Philippines without at least showing that we're making some progress, particularly by being relevant to the countries.
The journey of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage has been long and somewhat challenging. There have been some milestones, especially this year. Walk us through them.
Indeed, this has been in the making, for decades, where developing countries have been making the case, the fact that they don't contribute much to actually climate change, but yet they see the negative impact in the countries, and something needed to be done to support the most vulnerable countries. And there was a whole argument about having a fund entirely dedicated to responding to loss and damage, and that's why it was a very, very important fund, particularly for the most vulnerable countries. But we had a couple of milestones that are on the journey that's very important. First of all, at COP27, which was in Egypt, it was called the Africa Cup. That was the first time, I believe, the European countries convinced the developed countries the importance and the sense of urgency of having the fund, and that's when a decision was made to have this fund. Second milestone, the COP28, the decision was made now to operationalize the fund. And that was also important because following that decision, countries started actually pledging to the fund, about $766 million, and now we stand at $788 million. That was important. At COP29, we actually get sort of more pledges, but also a confirmation and a commitment that this fund is important. And now we're heading to COP30, which is a COP of implementation. And it was a great news that took place in the Philippines. We have something to put on the table just to demonstrate that at least we're being relevant to the countries. I think the biggest lesson to take away from the journey, that the global climate crisis calls for global solidarity. And the fact that through this fund, we demonstrate how we can come together and be able to provide some tangible responses dealing to loss and damage. In my view, that is a great example of what we can achieve when we come together.
Mm-hmm. And now, after the 7th board meeting, you have some announcements and key decisions were made. Would you like to share some with us?
Indeed. This board meeting was extremely important for a number of reasons. As I said, we got pledges been made. Those pledges have been converted to cash. It was very important to begin to see some funding actually flowing to those that need the money, and that's why it was important to make some decisions. Second, our board decided in our 5th board meeting in Barbados to launch what we call our startup phase, which is $250 million for 2 years, grant-only funding, $5 to $20 million per initiative. So the challenge now, how do we actually operationalize all of that to make sure at least the countries understand what to expect in accessing our funding. So the decision was made, just in a nutshell, the four things that are extremely important, without which we can't have this startup phase called the Barbados implementation modalities. Number one, we need to have what we call a project cycle. And that is basically when requests come to us until we make a decision, what is the process that we have to go through in assessing those opportunities and make a recommendation to the board. Second, equally important, we need to have something we call the funding criteria and the eligibility, so that when we receive any funding, we can make a judgment whether or not this funding aligns with what we cover as a fund. It was important, and that was also agreed upon by the board as well. Third, what we call the accreditation process. The board has decided to have an interim accreditation arrangement, which will help us to at least have an organization that we can work with, those who can actually provide, send funding requests to us so we can actually consider them. Last but not least, I should say, equally important, is what we call our access modalities. How do we actually, how do countries and partners access our funding? Whether it's direct banking support or the other access modality we need to put in place, and that was important. So what it does for us, as the good news, as a secretary of the fund, now we have the element that allows us to package it together and go to COP30 and do what we call the call for funding requests to let the international community, the countries need our support. We're actually ready to engage and ready to support them, and that's why it's a major, major decision for the board, and that's why I'm extremely excited, as you can see from my excitement, to be here. And then happening also in Philippines makes it just even more special, because this country has done so much in supporting this fund. I could not think of a better place to make the decision, so we're glad it happened in the Philippines.
Well, speaking of the support of the Philippines, President Marcos sent a message at the recent UN General Assembly, the 80th UNGA, and he said he underscored the importance of the FrLD, that it be timely, accessible, and equitable. He also mentioned last year that it would be swift and human-centered. Are we there? Is the fund going to be addressing the call of and the support of President Marcos?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that was the government of Philippines. We co-organized an event on the margin of UNGA. And the objective of that event was really to keep the momentum in terms of advocacy and championing the fund. And the fact that the President sent that video of support, I think, galvanized everybody at the event to demonstrate just the consistency in the support of Philippines. I'm extremely grateful for that. And I've extended to the government of Philippines our appreciation for that. I think what came out of that meeting is very much aligned with the vision outlined by the President. First of all, rapid response. Most of the countries who spoke at the event realized that one thing is to get resources, but when do you get them and how do you get them is equally important. So I think that sense of urgency in terms of rapid is very important. I think second, as a fund, we're not the first climate fund. So we're being actually instructed by a board to learn from the lessons of other funds in terms of processes, so we can be efficient the way we actually look at opportunities for funding. We make sure we actually engage with the country so we actually understand the priorities and the funding gaps where we come in. So there's really a commitment within the board and the secretariat, all of us combined, to make sure that there's efficiency so we can actually provide support where it's needed. And I can assure you, I get that pressure every single day from my board in making sure the secretariat has the capacity and the capabilities to process the funding request so we can advise the board.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about funding. What is the current status of resource mobilization, and how does the fund plan to address the funding gap?
Well, when it comes to funding, there are two main pillars, and they're not the same, but they complement each other. First of all, that's what we call voluntary contribution. In other words, we're not even raising funding, it's just countries recognizing the importance of the fund and basically committing to the fund. Where we stand today is at $788 million of voluntary contribution, and that is extremely important to underline. These are countries recognizing the importance of the fund and basically writing a check or making a commitment to come on board. Now the second part, and this is really what we call the mobilization of more predictable longer-term funding, and that's when we get to the billions in terms of fundraising and resource mobilization, and that's where we are today. And it's really important that we explore different sources, whether it's grant or philanthropy or private sector or other innovative way of mobilizing funding. So what was important in this meeting in Philippines, the board now has outlined the process for us to actually mobilize more predictable financing. So they've instructed us to look at all different options. We want to look at making the investment case where we should get the billions. They also ask us to look at the process in terms of the replenishment, and they want us to come back to the board for the board to decide so we can actually get to the next step, which is to mobilize in the billions. I think it is recognized the needs for response loss and damage is in the billions. So what we're doing right now with early intervention allows us to learn some of the lessons. By the time we get to the longer term actually engagement, hopefully we learn enough lessons to make sure of what not to do as we continue to expand the work of the fund.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the board. I know that it is quite a unique setup. You mentioned that it's very democratic, equitable. Tell us about the makeup of the board and the role that civil society plays in it.
Well, it's a very interesting board. First of all, our board is our ultimate decision-making body of the fund. That's what decisions are made. The secretaries support the board to make the decisions. So it's very important that the leadership is really at the board level and we support as a secretariat. Second, as I say, it's very democratic in the sense you got 26 board members, 14 from developing countries, and then 12 from developed countries. And they make decisions on consensus. And that's really important because it's not about voting. It's about sitting around at the table and listening to all the voices, all the concerns, and hopefully arrive at a decision which will satisfy everyone. Now, it makes our life complicated at the Secretariat, and it also makes us to take a little more time to make decisions. For example, for the decision in the Philippines, it took some time, but in the end, we made it. And I think that is what I appreciate with the board. They really understand the sense of urgency. Because of our commitment to transparency and inclusiveness within the board, the observers are actually accredited to sit within that board meeting. And at that board meeting, we have something called a dialogue with the civil society. And this is really when we hear the voices from the front line in terms of what is that we're missing, what are they concerned. And that is important to the board because it really educates the board about some of the issues that may not be actually discussed at the board. That's important for us. Yeah, so in addition to what happened within the board, where we have the observers that give us their views and their concerns, we as a secretariat and the board as well reach out to other stakeholders outside the boardroom. And the idea is to provide to the board all the information that they need to make an informed decision. And I think that's really what I find fascinating as a board. And as a secretariat, we always look forward to being aligned with the direction, the vision, the strategy of the board so we can deliver and support the board so that no one is left behind, so we can be impactful as an organization. And that's what I find fascinating.
I understand that this has been a special board and that some of the board members' terms have ended. Could we reflect on their contributions and how the board will continue to operate given some changes?
I think what's important, before we even talk about the people, so we're building the fundamentals of the governance of this organization, regardless who comes in and stay. And that is, for example, the way we make decisions, the way we build consensus, the way we actually bring decision to the table, and the way we actually negotiate the different texts to make a decision. I think over the past 6-7 board meetings, we actually building those fundamentals, whereby regardless actually who chairs the board, obviously will continue and build the momentum, have a continuity in the way we make decisions. However, I have to recognize the tremendous role played by our co-chairs, Jean-Christophe Denelli from France, representing the developed countries, Richard Sherman, coming from South Africa, representing the developing countries. And the two of them work hand in hand, even though they represent different constituency, but they all have the best interest of the fund, and that's why when they come to the board, there's a lot of alignment between our two co-chairs. Now, the rest of the board, I mean, they do actually, some stay for 3 years, some stay for a year and they get rotated, but there's a continuity within the board, and I think that's what I appreciate. People understand that you may come, do your part, do your contribution. When you move on, whoever comes, build from where you left on, and that's how you build an organization, that's how you build a governance.
That's great. Given that you've had many engagements with multiple stakeholders and you've just finished the 7th board meeting, what is the priority now of the FrLD as you go back to your office?
Well, priority number one, now that the board has decided the package for launching the call for funding requests, we have some work to do. We need to go back and put together the template, the terms of reference, the guidelines, the assessment methodology. Those are the tools we need to be able to at least be able to process what comes our way. Second, we need to also make sure the countries designate the focal point. These are going to be our interlocutors in the countries. And that's important because they really coordinate the work on the ground, identify the priorities, and bring them up so that we can begin to advise the board. We have some work to do on the resource mobilization strategy. When I get back to Washington with the team, we're going to go back and look at what is the decision made by the board or the instruction given by the board to us so we can translate that into an action plan and get to work. So there's a lot of work to be done. I'm also going to be spending a lot of time in building the teams. We are recruiting staff within the Secretariat because our work can only be delivered if we have the right capacity on board. But I'm extremely grateful at the Secretariat. We have men and women come from different parts of the world who are dedicated, committed, mission-driven, and that's how we're going to deliver as a Secretariat so that, again, no one is left behind so we can protect the most vulnerable countries.
You mentioned that the next COP is going to be the COP of implementation, and you hope to be able to accept some proposals already?
Yes, not by the COP. The COP is when we actually launch the call for funding requests. So from that moment, we're going to give countries 5 to 6 months to go through the process, because now they understand, and then fill in the template, and then go through the requirement and send something back to us. It's only when we get to our board meeting, I believe in April in Zambia next year, then we can provide to the board, based on what we receive, based on the criteria, this is certainly what we see. So the board will then make a decision and which one to retain, which one to fund, and that's the way it's going to be organized.
Initially, the 250 million will be divided into how you mentioned during the press briefing, like 5 to 20 million per
Now, the way
project?
it's organized is $250 million, recognizing the most vulnerable countries are what they call the small island development states, and then the LDC, list development countries. The board has decided that 50% of allocation should be given to those countries. And then second, the board, as I said, decided it's going to be grant only, so countries are not borrowing to fix the problem. And each of the initiative will be $5 to $20 million. So we'll have to assess the requests being sent to us, how much they cost, so that we can at least make sure they stay within the range of what the initiative it is. Now, as I said, it's $250 million now, but we have close to $400 million at the bank. So our board can decide at our next board meeting whether to add more resources so we can keep up with the demand. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, these are some very significant developments, and congratulations to the Secretariat and the board of the FrLD. I'd like to know, what are your sentiments as you leave Manila after the 7th board meeting?
Well, look, first of all, from a personal point of view, being the first inaugural executive director of this fund, less than a year on the job, to have such a great achievement from the board, from the secretary, frankly, it's it touches me from a very personal level, because I know, as I said at the board, what we do is bigger than all of us. It's really not about us. It's about the people in the front line that we support. So that, to me, makes me extremely happy to realize that through this fund, we're going to make a difference in the lives of many people. I think second, I've seen my team back in Washington. We're not many right now, but extremely dedicated, hardworking, and to see that at least the hard work we've done and engaging back in Washington is paying off. In my view, it's really something very rewarding. So all of the team, exhausted, but we're going back to Washington, energized, inspired by what came out of here. And I talked to some of them yesterday. They said, well, we're going to take a break. Don't call us for the next couple of days, and we're going to get some rest. But when we get back to Washington, we're going to get back to work and continue, because the real work starts now so that we can deliver. So I'm extremely happy. And I've taken this job because I believe in the mission. And most of the people, in fact, all the people in the Secretariat, they accepted to join because they believe in the vision and the mission. And that mission and the vision will carry the day so we can support the most vulnerable countries.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was Mr. Ibrahima Cheikh Diong, the Executive Director of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. Thank you.